Today we're talking about the Storm Wolf tattoo design. Welcome back. You might recognize this tattoo design from the Using Digital Art video, but in this video we focus on how we made this one design, and we'll show you a lot of techniques that you can start using right away. And if you haven't already, take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Our client would like a wolf on her thigh, and this wolf is inspired by Moro from the anime Princess Mononoke. In the movie, Moro is a wolf deity and represents the spirit of the forest, pushing back against industrialization. And our client would prefer the wolf to have the colors and the markings of a gray wolf, and to have it surrounded by wind and Japanese maple leaves. The outside of the thigh is one of those spots that is perfect for a huge tattoo, and there are several ways that our design could flow, so you'll want to take your time at this stage and experiment with a lot of options. In the end, we go with a simple flow pattern that travels in an S-curve as it moves up towards the hips. And as usual, our client has sent us a few images to help explain what they're looking for, so we'll keep these here for inspiration. To get some anatomy and lighting references, I generated a bunch of images, and this is where I start to decide on the expression of the wolf. We want it to look aggressive, but we don't want it to look like it's lost its mind. So I'm paying close attention to the wrinkles that form when the wolf bares its teeth. And I'm also looking for a pose that will suit the long and tall shape of the thigh without having our design wrap around too much. And since a lot of these images are of sculptures, they pick up a lot of interesting light and shadow, which is very useful to reference. And to help understand the color and markings of a wolf, I put a few open source images into our project. And this will help prevent us from having our wolf look too much like a dog, which is a very common occurrence in tattoos. And if the content of your design will be showing its teeth, then it's a good idea to have a reference for that as well. And with that, our research is done and we're ready to start with our rough composition. As a starting point, I made a composite that we made from several parts of the generated images. I then took those pieces and painted and blended them together. And this will be a good placeholder until we overhaul the wolf head later in the design. In order to reinforce the flow pattern, we're going to develop a distinct foreground and background. To do that, we start to rough in a foreground that sits above the wolf head made of maple leaves. And to get some details started, we sketch in some of the leaves in the foreground, and we do the same for the leaves in the background. Then I make a new layer and start to paint in these big fields of shading, which looks pretty crazy at first, but this is me separating out the different planes. And I do this so the planes that are touching each other have a different value. And here I also reshape a few areas with Liquify. Then I start a lot of sketching and rough painting. And this is our first real chance to start developing the details. But in this stage, you don't want to refine anything too much. We're going to save that for a future pass. The goal for now is just to get everything blocked in. In this stage, we're doing a bit of everything, and we're sketching the foundation for what will later become our line work. But we're also figuring out where those large curving shapes of negative space will land. We sort of want it to feel like the wind is moving the leaves around. And we're also starting to block in the shading for our wolf. And by the time we're done, our wolf will be quite different compared to where we started. And that's the reason why I don't mind starting a composite made from generated images. In the end, it just ends up being a completely new design, and your comp should only ever really be a starting point. And in this stage, you want to be bold and try out some big ideas, and you want to think about your design as a whole. It's easy to get lost in the small details, but there'll be lots of time for that later. And as I'm working through the rough, I also take some time to do some previs to see how this looks on our blank. And the Liquify tool helps give us a chance to reshape a few areas. And after a big roughing stage, it's time to start in with our final artwork. And to get things started, we're going to do some line work. Now, doing line work on the tablet can be really nice. A lot of you know about line smoothing, and this can make for some really clean artwork. And as I'm lining these maple leaves, I'm experimenting with a few different line weights, and making the outside lines a little thicker than the inside. And I think this is pretty much how I'd line it on paper. But even more important than the ability to get really smooth lines is the ability to erase huge sections of line work, or move them around, or manipulate them with transform tools. And this kind of control is so useful that I end up lining a lot of my paper drawings on the tablet as well. But unfortunately, this means I do very little line work with pens anymore. Now, I can totally understand how this might concern a person who's interested in a more traditional technique when designing tattoos. But for me personally, when it comes to making my choices in line work, really I make the exact same choices whether I'm using paper or a tablet. So the tablet gives me all the control at really no detectable cost in decision making. I guess I do miss out on the flex that comes from doing things by hand, but I'm willing to take that hit because line work on the computer is just too useful. Here you can see I'm doing the line work in two ways. The outside lines tend to get a thicker line, and the inside lines tend to be really thin. Some of the references my client shared with me during their first consultation were in the neo-traditional style, and this is one of my favorite tattooing styles. In neo-traditional, there's usually a large range of line weights, and a lot of the interior lines are super thin. And I'm sort of ashamed to admit that even though I did my research at the beginning of the design, I didn't do the correct amount of teeth in these areas. I'd love to say that I was making a teachable moment here on purpose, but this was a genuine mistake that I had to correct. And with the beginning of our line work done, it's time to go in for a huge cleanup. This is the stage where we remove all the jank from our design. The goal here is to create a really smooth foundation for when we add detail in a future pass. And my favorite tool for the cleanup phase is the smudge tool. And I'm making a few choices here about what value each section will have. It can be really interesting at this stage to go through your layers and look at your outlines on their own as well as the shading on its own. After reshaping the outside a bit, we're left with a really clean foundation, and now we're ready to go in with our last detail pass. Here, we're focusing a lot on the shading and a lot on the highlights as well, and we end up doing a bit of everything. Now, if I was doing this artwork on paper, would I have made the same choices? Well, in my experience, I would have made similar choices, but I would have had a very different experience with control. When you're making a drawing, you don't get infinite retries at an area. It's a lot more intuitive and a lot less calculated. And when you're drawing upon your intuition, it really accesses a whole different part of your skill set. So nowadays, when looking at how to approach a new project, for me, some are better on the tablet and others are better on paper. And it's nice to have options. Plus, my clients also have the option to request their art to be made on paper if they prefer, which in turn gives them the option to keep their drawing, which can be pretty cool. But look, I really think that every technique has advantages, and I feel you should just use whatever feels best for you. And here, we're getting into some color. I'm adding some of the markings that are distinct to the gray wolf, and I'm adding some yellow to that wolf eye. I end up using the tablet to color almost 100% of my artwork. The alternative is to use alcohol-based markers or in some rare cases pencil crayons. But for me, the computer is the undisputed best platform for adding color, no matter if you've made your artwork on the computer or on paper. But one of the less talked about and yet most powerful parts of adding color on the computer is being able to change the color of your background, because this is what allows you to see colors like white and bright yellow in your final presentation. If you're designing your color on a white background, then it's a lot more difficult to design your highlights, and most tattoo artists add these highlights for when they do their final tattoo. But it's nice to be able to design these highlights, so by the time I'm doing the tattoo, I'm doing everything for a second time. And to add some depth to the image, I'm just adding these dark pockets, just to help the foreground pop out a little more. And I'm also adding a drop shadow under some of the elements to help separate them from each other a bit. And since this shading is on its own layer, I can go in after and lower the intensity to whatever looks best. And then I make a version of the artwork that we can use in previs in order to see how things look on our blank. And I then spend a bit of time tweaking the levels and the color saturation. And with that, we have the artwork complete and a big presentation to show our client during the next consultation. And that is the first draft of the Storm Wolf tattoo design. Hey, if you got anything out of this, then help us out by hitting the like button and subscribe to our channel. We come out with new videos often. And make sure to hit the bell icon so you don't miss out. And if you're serious about creating the best art possible for your tattoos, then go to tattoodesignschool.com and check out the masterclass. This is everything I wish I knew when I was first starting out, and it will push you to create artwork you didn't think was possible. This is the perfect investment in your tattoo career, so check out the masterclass at tattoodesignschool.com. But most importantly, share this video with the person you know who's interested in artwork and tattoos. And we'll see you in the next one.